Welcome once again to Global Challenge 213-216, 4 years of right use of time, right use of mind. I am Clarity Ross, bringing this big boost to you using affirmations, which is the fastest way to go. And in this video, we are going to remind ourselves that the ego cannot be seduced into learning anything. So we are going to talk about various ways we try to seduce the ego into learning something. For instance, we might say, sweetness can't teach the ego anything. Sweetness doesn't need to be sweetness. Instead of sweetness, oneness is seen. Kindness can't teach the ego anything. Kindness doesn't need to be kindness. Instead of kindness, oneness is seen. Seductiveness can't teach the ego anything. Seductiveness doesn't need to be seductiveness. Instead of seductiveness, oneness is seen. Hugs can't teach the ego anything. Hugs don't need to be hugs. Instead of hugs, oneness is seen. Group prayer can't teach the ego anything. Group prayer doesn't need to be group prayer. Instead of group prayer, oneness is seen. Praise can't teach the ego anything. Praise doesn't need to be praise. Instead of praise, oneness is seen. Worship can't teach the ego anything. Worship doesn't need to be worship. Instead of worship, oneness is seen. Oneness can't teach the ego anything. Oneness doesn't need to be oneness. Instead of oneness, oneness is seen. Okay, very true. So we climb the ladder up there to oneness, and there are many other forms that may come to mind as you think about how can we seduce the ego into learning something. We couldn't coerce it, we couldn't trick it. Maybe we can seduce it into something. No, we cannot. Beauty can't teach the ego anything. Beauty doesn't need to be beauty. Instead of beauty, oneness is seen. Heart can't teach the ego anything. Heart doesn't need to be heart. Instead of heart, oneness is seen. So there we have some forms right there of what we are trying to do. One angle that we're taking. We try to use everything: coercion, trickeration, and seduction. All of that, saying, "Come on, ego, we're gonna surround you, and we're gonna force you, get you to learn somehow, some way. We're gonna get you to learn something." And of course, there is no learner there at all. But we keep insisting if we can get learning to take place, there must be a learner. So we're assuming that we can get learning to take place, and in that point, there must be a learner. But no, we cannot learn to accomplish the impossible. So we are going to practice these forms of trying to seduce the ego into learning. Okay. Same old thing. We can use the light. When the light's on, that's your turn to respond. So, okay. Sweetness can't teach the ego anything. Sweetness doesn't need to be sweetness. Instead of sweetness, oneness is seen. Kindness can't teach the ego anything. Kindness doesn't need to be kindness. Instead of kindness, oneness is seen. Hugs can't teach the ego anything. Hugs don't need to be hugs. Instead of hugs, oneness is seen. Peace can't teach the ego anything. Peace doesn't need to be peace. Instead of peace, oneness is seen. Harmony can't teach the ego anything. Harmony doesn't need to be harmony. Instead of harmony, oneness is seen. Seduction can't teach the ego anything. Seduction doesn't need to be seduction. Instead of seduction, oneness is seen. Prayer can't teach the ego anything. Prayer doesn't need to be prayer. Instead of prayer, oneness is seen. Group meeting, group harmonization can't teach the ego anything. Group harmonization doesn't need to be group harmonization. Instead of group harmonization, oneness is seen. Worship can't teach the ego anything. Worship doesn't need to be worship. Instead of worship, oneness is seen. Praise can't teach the ego anything. Praise doesn't need to be praise. Instead of praise, oneness is seen. Flattery can't teach the ego anything. Flattery doesn't need to be flattery. Instead of flattery, oneness is seen. Oneness can't teach the ego anything. Oneness doesn't need to be oneness. Instead of oneness, oneness is seen. All right, very great. We're going to do the oneness in the three part times three times three format, because that's the big one. We climb the ladder up there. Now, of course, you will, other aspects of how to seduce the ego into learning, you will come up with some. Of course, we can come up with those. I missed out. They're beauty. See, beauty. Let's do beauty. Beauty can't teach the ego anything. Beauty doesn't need to be beauty. Instead of beauty, oneness is seen. Okay. So as various aspects occur to you of how do we sweet talk the ego into learning somehow. Shall we praise it? Shall we flatter it? Shall we worship it? Shall we seduce it? Shall we hug it? Shall we kiss it? Shall we pray to it? Shall we praise it? Shall we worship it? Shall we do all this stuff? None of that works at all. None of it works at all. Even everyone getting together in oneness. Everyone gets together in oneness. Connecting. Connectivity. Can connectivity of oneness? No. Even oneness can't teach the ego anything. Even oneness can't teach the ego anything. So we will practice that 3 times 3 here. Okay. Oneness can't teach the ego anything. Oneness can't teach the ego anything. Oneness can't teach the ego anything. Oneness doesn't need to be oneness. Oneness doesn't need to be oneness. Oneness doesn't need to be oneness. Instead of oneness, the vision of oneness is seen. Instead of oneness, the vision of oneness is seen. Instead of oneness, the vision of oneness is seen. Now we're going to embellish it. Oneness can't teach the ego thing. Instead of oneness, oneness doesn't need to be oneness. Instead of oneness, the gentle and sublime dawning of the vision of oneness is seen right now. Oneness can't teach the ego anything. Oneness doesn't need to be oneness. Instead of oneness, the gentle and sublime and awesome dawning of the vision of oneness is seen right now, this very moment. Oneness can't teach the ego anything. Oneness doesn't need to be oneness. Instead of oneness, the gentle, sublime, and awesome dawning of the vision of oneness is seen right now, this very instant. Do that last part one more time. Instead of oneness, the gentle and sublime and awesomely beautiful dawning of the vision of oneness is seen right now, this very instant. One more time. Instead of oneness, the gentle and sublime and awesome and glorious dawning of the vision of oneness is seen right now, this very instant. And there you go. It's that easy. It's that easy. You see, when we are talking about oneness, we're trying to look at oneness. We don't see it. We're looking at concepts, images, thoughts about oneness. So all those thoughts, concepts about oneness that we think is oneness, thinking about oneness, okay, we need to set that down and have the vision of oneness. Okay, so all that thinking about thoughts and concepts about oneness, that is still trying to teach the ego something. It is still trying to teach the ego something. It's like the final effort. Let's get oneness together. Let's get this. Let's everyone in the world be one, and that'll teach the ego something. No. That is still trying to do something with oneness, which is a concept. We're not seeing it, because when we see oneness, we realize there's nothing that needs to be done. Nothing that needs to be done. Oneness is not a tool. Oneness is not a tool to accomplish something with. Okay. So, to go back over this video, we practice forms of seduction, trying to seduce the ego, right? We did the easy 1, 2, 3 format. This beauty cannot teach the ego anything. Beauty cannot teach the ego anything. And we can be specific, like this beautiful flower cannot teach the ego anything. Right? Flowers, all these beautiful flowers. These beautiful flowers can't teach the ego anything. These beautiful flowers don't need to be these beautiful flowers. Instead of these beautiful flowers, the vision of oneness is seen. So we may think we can go to the ego with a beautiful flower and beautiful person, beautiful hair, beautiful face, smiles, beautiful praise, beautiful worship, and seduce the ego into learning something. Because they're so sweet and kind, hug the ego. But there's nothing there to hug. We say, ego, if you just learn something, I'll hug you. Ego, if you just learn something, I'll worship you. Ego, if you just learn something, I'll praise you. Ego, if you just learn something, I'll be so sweet and kind to you. Look at how sweet and kind. If you just learn just one thing, just learn this one thing. What's that? How to die. How to die, you see. How can God learn to die? How can reality learn to die? And is there something other than reality? Is there something outside of reality that can learn how to die? No, there's not. There's only a spirit having this hypothetical dream of what if this were possible? What if? What if? What if there was something that could learn how to die? What if? But there isn't. There isn't any learner. It's just all our play of imagination. Play of imagination. So, all right. Very great. I've enjoyed doing this video as I have enjoyed doing all these videos, and we will meet up in the next video.